Welcome to our first of 10 webinars on Agile data governance. We'll have re-recorded this first one. We had a few technical issues, so we wanted to give you a better recording for those of you who attended. That's why you can't see yourself or maybe sound slightly different, but we'll be covering off the same points. So let's start with that. Why we call this thing Agile data governance? One of the things we're going to talk to you about early on today is some of the challenges that I'm sure you'll recognize in the sector. There isn't really an appetite, we don't think, for kind of big kind of data management, data governance, data strategy projects. We think people's focus is understandably elsewhere. So we're looking to give you something that will allow you to kind of introduce data governance in a kind of a stealthy, non-invasive kind of way, and kind of share the benefits early and make it a very compelling proposition. It doesn't mean that there aren't still kind of big bang approaches, and we'll definitely talk about that. But we've kind of written this thing to sort of kind of be cognizant of the current sort of realities in the sector. What we're not going to give you is one solution. There isn't a single solution. There isn't a single thing that you can do that will make this successful. What we are going to do through the 10 webinars is ask you a bunch of questions at the end of each one. And if you were happy to leave your email, then we will send you a personalized, what we think is a journey, the best way for you to introduce data governance at your institution. That will make more sense as you start to come to a few more of these and see the kind of questions that we ask. We're not going to talk much about technology. We think this is a people-led change. Technology has a huge part to play, but this is not technology-led. We're not making investment cases for technology. So we will talk about technology around automation and some other things and possibly tooling, but we're not going to talk about it in terms of being the thing that's front and center of what we're talking about. And the last thing we would say is this is not a project. There is project-based activities to get started, but it's not a project. It's not a diet. It's a lifestyle change. This is a long-term change about how your institution thinks about data, and you have to be in it for the long term. So I'll be presenting the first two of these, and then Rav will be taking the next one on data strategy. So Rav can introduce yourself now.
Hi everybody, I'm Rav Adams, and yeah, I'm joining Alex in introducing these webinars over the next 10 weeks. I will be kind of putting my 2 pence worth in here and there, and we'll also be monitoring the chat as we go forward. So anything to do with the votes, any questions that anybody has, the chat is worth popping those things into, and that's even after the webinars themselves, not only during. So yeah, we want to build a community of practice, and we're happy to do that with you as we're going forward.
Sure, thanks, Rav. Because it's not going to be it's not a straightforward journey. If it was, I don't think you'd need any help with it. There's a lot of kind of you don't kind of get better at DG every day. There's definitely sort of setbacks and different things and things to consider. And again, we're really cognizant of that, having done this with lots of universities. And this thing is written specifically for UK universities. So we will talk to you about the kind of places where we think you'll get some pushback, where you may get some issues, and try and give you some coping strategies and some ways to alleviate those. Anything to add to that, Rav?
No, I just think that yeah, I hope that what you see on the bottom there is kind of something that you would recognize. I don't think there's many places that we've spoken to, have we, Alex, where that it isn't an absolute tangled mess in trying to kind of sort the data out. So we just wanted to kind of acknowledge that we know what it's like. It's never as easy as what some people think that it should be.
No, and I mean, but there was also on the flip side, there's areas of good practice. We want to bring those out and talk about how you might bring those out. And we may do a customer one later on. We're not quite sure yet. But so I think it's but I think it's just a recognition that this is very easy. So let's kind of get all the depressing stuff out of the way. I'm not going to read off the slide, but you can kind of see these things. I think we all have kind of been sort of aware of these things happening, especially the first couple. And I think some universities have kind of then individual issues around some of the other stuff. But certainly none of these things are going to get kind of better in the short term. I think we need to be aware that that's the environment that we're operating in. And certainly with the level of kind of voluntary redundancy in the sector, that kind of quote on the right sort of feels like what it feels like most days. So we're in a challenging environment to be able to kind of try and make some kind of change. And I think it's going to be if you try and think we just can kind of do this, we're just going to do it, we're going to kind of just bootstrap this thing in the organization. It's hard to do that. So I think there are ways to make the case, definitely, and I think we can convince you to do that. And I think there are ways to, once you've made the case, to implement it. But we are working in this background. So. What do you think about that, Ralph? What else should we add there?
I think that's it's very true that it is very difficult. And I know that a lot of the things that are listed there on the left-hand side feel, well, they are, but it's not just a feeling, they are very, very big, overarching, holistic things that an entire institution needs to consider. But they are just examples. So what we're saying about data governance is it can be done on a much smaller scale. We'll go into how in future webinars, but it's not about trying to fix everything all at once. So if you know that you can kind of pick one of these things and know it's a real issue for your institution, but really focus in on what you can do within your control to make how your area works better, and use that as a little bit of an incubator for then kind of evidencing the benefits of some of data governance principles and practices, that's definitely then the way to go. It's not that we're trying to kind of say to you that you need to kind of take on all of these big challenges that currently exist and try and break them down, and push through what is a very challenging environment. So although it looks quite large in terms of scale and scope, given those examples that we've got here, you can very much break them down and do what is within your control.
Yeah, that's very true. I think it's a really good point. So let's talk about what that might look like. So you'll have seen this slide if you've been kind of we've been sending you stuff out. So the first three workshops that we're doing between now and Christmas are kind of really making the case for the why, and then afterwards we get straight into the what, the operating model. How do you start? How do you scale it? But we do think it's important to make the case for why. Often we see people kind of go straight into the what, and they kind of run up against a brick wall. So we're going to talk about kind of three ways to make the why, and we're going to kind of start off with that with a kind of a real kind of primer. So why do we need data governance? I mean, there's always the thing about what's a good definition of data governance, and that's like another 2-hour webinar. But we will talk about comms and branding and what you call it later on. But we think that data governance has got kind of essentially sort of three outputs and kind of one facet. So we think the key thing that you get if you have a very kind of good sort of framework around DG, even if it's Ralph saying not for the entire organization, but I think it's trust in data. So it's this idea that we hear all the time single version of the truth. We kind of talk about kind of a single version of trust. So this idea that when people get the data, they can trust it, they can use it, they feel that it's the best quality available for their use case that they have. And that's really driving the second two things, which are utility and sustainability. So the idea that we can continue to, everybody says we need more data. I mean, our view is that you probably need a bit less data. You just need to use the stuff you've got more often. Nothing is more toxic in data management, data governance, and unreconciled data sources, where, somebody comes into a meeting and says, well, I've got 9, and somebody says, I've got 6, and we spend the whole meeting talking about whose data is correct. So when we talk about utility, we're really talking about the ability for data to kind of have its superpower. I mean, you've heard data as an asset. What we're saying here is that we do believe data is an asset. We don't think it's treated as one. But one of the things that you can do with data that you can't do with anything else is you can use it multiple times. And that's not the same if you've got a building and you've got a timetable scheduled in there. For a lecture, you can only use it for that lecture. If you've got a budget and you spend it on X, you can't spend it on Y. If you've got a member of staff allocated to project X, they can't do project Y at the same time. Data's not like that. If you've got good data, shared data that everybody trusts and it's accessible, they can find it, then they're going to use it. So that's kind of the goal for us. And the final thing is sustainability, so not making it a project. I mean, we see a lot of projects around kind of HR systems, finance systems, especially student systems, where the data's all cleaned, it's all put in, it's all lovely, everybody likes it, but there's no framework to look after it afterwards, and it just falls off a cliff, right? Just suffers entropy. So we think that the key outcome of good data governance is sustainability, is understanding what the quality needs to be and maintaining that. And all of these things are done through ownership, done through the idea of accountability for data and having kind of, kind of real people behind this. And we're going to cover that in a lot more detail when we get to the operating model. But these are kind of these are the kind of four key things that when we think about data governance, we think are the things that we'd need to apply to a university. We'd need to talk about the benefits. But these aren't any good for you at the moment because they're very generic. So we're going to talk to you about how do you turn these into something that make people say, we have to do this. We need to stop doing what we're currently doing. What did I miss there, Rav? Lots, probably.
Just that this is a really, really key piece of information. These are the four kind of anchors to data governance, just like you've said. So wherever you can, if you can think of an acronym where it will come to mind a lot easier and quicker, then by all means do so. I don't think Alex was very impressed with my suggestion, which is trousers. But because data governance is so dependent on these four elements, it's good to kind of create something that is a bit of a comms tool, and that everybody will be kind of quite easily recognizing what we mean by data governance, and it's kind of a talking point. So something to think about. If you can kind of come up with anything, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I've kind of got my own, which is even worse. I'm not even prepared to share it publicly, but so it would be good. So we do. So if you there's some universities, maybe we can give you some examples. There's some universities that do actually brand this stuff separately. In some people that kind of have it as part of kind of a wider thing, which is the right one. Depends on your university. Again, no right answers. Lots of good advice, and then it's up to you because you understand your university to be able to say what's the best way for me. And that's what we're trying to do, is to kind of guide you through the different options. There is definitely not one size fits all. If anybody turns up to you and says, I've got a framework for data governance that's going to make you successful, do not let them in the building. Right? They are not telling you the truth. So let's have a think about how we'd apply that to the universities. So what we see a lot is, so that thing on the right is just me I picked up off LinkedIn a couple of days ago. We see this stuff all the time. The driver for good quality data is that people talk about decision making, talk about sort of this kind of like we're going to give us this capability we don't currently have. I don't think this really resonates at universities. I mean, we don't really see this. We don't see this making the case. People might nod, but it doesn't really make the case. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that universities have spent a lot of money on data. Now, a lot of that may have been in tech, but they have spent a lot of money on data, and they think of data. A lot of senior people think of data very much in silo. It's like the funding, the returns, the management information that I get. It's not kind of considered as this thing that I'm going to apply to making a decision in the same way that I may with other assets when I think about finance or people or buildings or intellectual property. I don't think it's got that state. I don't think the level of maturity in universities kind of allows that thing on the right to be true. I think we need to be way more targeted than that. So we've kind of got this graph here. Well, we talk about there's kind of two ways to think about if I apply this capability that I'm going to build, this thing that we're going to call Agile data governance or whatever. I can kind of apply it in a couple of ways. I'm going to assume I'm kind of down in the grey area at the moment, and I'm going to go one of two ways. And I can't go directly to university wide. I'm going to have to just choose my route. And whichever route you go will benefit both sides, but it definitely will benefit one more than the other. You need to make some decisions early on about how you want to apply this capability. So you can kind of go down the targeted defensive route, which is going to say we want to mitigate risk with data. We want to mitigate with the risk with the use of that data. We want to sort of focus on things that's really important. So it's generally things like external returns, student return, for example. It's generally things like stuff that's going to secure funding. It's stuff that the university absolutely may be judged on sort of externally by people. So it tends to be that kind of data, and that's fine. There's a lot of universities go that way. A lot of data governance initiatives 5 or 6 years ago started because of data futures. So that's fine, but it doesn't. It is only obviously has a kind of a smaller reach, so it's only going to affect less. People are going to see less benefit, but the people that do see benefit are going to see benefit from it. Or you go after the kind of agile stuff. So you say, oh, we've got a new HR system and we've got a new student information system coming in with, putting in work tribe. Something else is happening. We're doing degree apprenticeships. Something's happening at university, and by having better utility, better trust in data, we can kind of unlock, unblock, accelerate, support that initiative in a way that if we didn't do it, that initiative would struggle to deliver. So you're really trying to look at two things. It's really kind of one's really around risk mitigation and one's really about opportunity. There's a lot more on this that we could talk about, but I'll kind of hand over to Rav and see what her spin on this is.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of make the point that it's very easy to immediately jump to the university wide, to that top right hand corner, because ideally that is where we all want to be. And yes, that is probably where you need to be focusing on in the longer term. But we need to really kind of consider the status of our institution, especially when thinking about those a few points a few slides ago. Around the difficulties that institutions are facing. So we need to be pragmatic to start off the data governance capability that you're thinking would be beneficial to either you in your area or to a slightly larger area within the institution. You need to think about what is going to be most pragmatic, what's going to be welcomed and supported. And in all honesty, university-wide it is incredibly hard and does require a lot of additional sponsorship, as well as funding, because that's something that you need at least one person then to start supporting. So there's resource implications, etc. If that's the route that the institution is already willing to and has invested in going down, then that's fantastic. But for those institutions where things are much more restrictive in terms of budgeting, in terms of the availability of capacity, etc., it might be that one of the quadrants there in that graph on the left would be more appropriate. But by no means are we saying that your ultimate goal, your ultimate objective shouldn't be to move to the university-wide quadrant, because ultimately that is where most benefit will be seen out of a data governance capability.
Yeah, and one of the things that's going to do is pull the data out of silo, and we always talk about data in silo. I think we should also kind of address the elephant in the room, Rob, and I'm going to pass this back to you again, which is that we're not talking, when we talk about targeted defensive, we talk about reducing costs of operation, making things more efficient, looking at process. We're not talking about specific things that say you need less people, are we? That's not what we would absolutely say. Do not do that. Do you want to kind of pick that up?
This is so cliche and a little cheesy, but it's so much about doing more with data. And unfortunately, it takes things going wrong for some institutions to realise that actually there's a lot of resource in data that is living within the institution that isn't being taken advantage of. So it's about making the data work harder. It's not about having less people because you don't need to do as much. It's about allowing people to actually do the jobs that they've signed up for, because it's very common that people are cornered into doing a lot of data intensive work when that's not their skill set, that's not the role that they signed up for. But it's something that they just have to do, which then means that the institution suffers in other ways, for example, student experience, etc., if there are roles that have to input data. That's a very high level, very kind of skimming the surface example. But you can see here it's not about minimizing resources, it's about supporting resource to be able to get what they need in a much more structured and much more helpful way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good summary. So you'll see now, this is what's going to happen in every one that we do. We're going to give you two kind of key points, and we're going to ask you to vote on them. And by voting on them, you're going to help us understand what the best way through the institution would be to introduce this kind of work. So we're going to ask you to vote on these. We will post the results, the sort of summary results, not individual results, in the chat afterwards, and we'll probably put them on LinkedIn. So you can see these and vote now. We're going to use polls. So if you've got any kind of issues with that with your institution, do let us know. We'll find different ways to collect the information from you. You'll see that in when you look at the form, we've put in a rider around privacy, so you understand why we're collecting the information for. And it's all optional. If you don't wish to do that and you don't want to, you would want to push participate, but you don't want to put your email address in, that's absolutely fine. It just means we can't send you any kind of personalized guidance. There is no other agenda here. So it's entirely up to you if you wish to participate, but certainly you'll be able to see the results. Anything to add to that, Rav?
No, just that for those that have signed up to the series, we will repost the links after every few webinars, so that if somebody wants to kind of go back and recomplete the votes, that's absolutely fine. So those will be posted on the chat that people have access to once everything has been recorded for this first tranche before Christmas.
Yeah. So we're going to put the first 3 ones of this recording and the next 2, plus the content up on our website, which that'll be available for free. Yeah, that'll be done before Christmas. So that's us for today. First one done. So hopefully it was interesting. We appreciate that the information comes pretty fast. So do feel free to reflect on it and drop us a note in the chat or drop us an email if you've got any questions, any comments. So we've kind of talked about the value of data governance sort of in kind of 4 generic ways, and how you might apply that in a couple of different ways. I asked you to vote on that. And next week we're going to talk about how do I then communicate this? How do I kind of get this out to the people who are going to help me introduce this? How do I engage my senior leadership? Do I need a data vision? Well, if you come back next week, hopefully we can give you some good advice, see whether you do or you don't. Any closing comments, Rav?
No, thank you for joining us for the first one. It's always difficult, the first one, getting that done. Sorry for any teething problems that you kind of went through with us. But yeah, we'll be looking forward to seeing you in future ones.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Rav. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.